Paul, your magazine here had done an investigation and publicized the story of the high-scale corruption where some of the former government officials are involved, including the former Ministry of Transportation. But often, we don't know these stories unless they're coming internationally, but they're significant for the country.
Yeah.
So what is on the stake? What is the significance of that story?
Well, the significance is that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was very clear to everybody in Latvia that the country was run by three oligarchs. Mr. Lembergs, Mr. Stressers, and Mr. Stēle.
And they are?
And Mr. Lembergs is still the mayor of Ventspils. Mr. Stēle was a former prime minister who continued to be very influential in politics and in business. And Mr. Stressers was a number of times the Minister of Transportation. And it was clear to everybody that basically all the important decisions were being taken by these three guys.
For a decade? For more than?
Well, a little less. I mean, basically, starting around 2000 and up until the crisis. I think perhaps it was a little bit of an exaggeration, but clearly they were incredibly important for the political system and what happened in politics in Latvia. Not that they were all-powerful. There were other governments. There could be resistance from the population. We had big protests in 2007 that led to the collapse of the government. But in any case, they were very, very important. And in 2009, our Anti-Corruption Bureau started listening to the conversations that one of these three, Mr. Stressers, was having in a hotel room where he met with all his business partners and other politicians. And they listened to those conversations for 2 years. In 2011, they decided that they had enough material to try to start a criminal process that would lead to the indictment of Stressers. And actually, this decision had incredibly important political effects in Latvia because they went to the parliament and asked for permission to search Mr. Stressers' his home, because he was a deputy, and so the parliament had to give permission for his home to be searched. And the parliament refused. They voted down that request. They said, no, we're not giving you permission to search his home. And because of that, the president, Zatlers, initiated a procedure that led to the dissolution of parliament, to extraordinary elections, and basically to Stressers and Stēle, two of these guys, being thrown out of politics because their parties lost those elections. And they didn't get into parliament, and basically they are now not nearly as influential as they used to be. So that in and of itself was a very important result. But the problem was that the investigation based on these conversations went on and on and on and on, and finally at the end of last year it was shut down, and the procuracy said we couldn't get enough material to take this to court, so we're shutting down the investigation. And what my magazine got was the conversations that took place in that hotel room between 2009 and 2011. But we took the most important parts and published them in 3 issues of our magazine, where you could see how Stressers talked about his hidden interests in various businesses, how he made decisions as a minister, as a deputy, as somebody who was also very influential as a deputy in the Riga City Council, in the port of Riga, where these businesses did their thing. We saw, you could read how he talked with another of the oligarchs, Lembergs, about putting their candidate in for president of the country or for the general procurator and for all sorts of other important positions. They talked about how they controlled the press and the TV and how they influenced various television stations in Latvia. And this has, I mean, it's been like an explosion of a bomb in Latvia, because there are two issues. First of all, why was there no indictment? How could it be that after you read all this and it becomes entirely clear that these guys were conspiring to do all sorts of illegal things? It's clear from the conversations. Why was the procuracy not able to actually bring a case against Stressers? And the second thing is, since Lembergs is still active in politics, what are the implications for politics today? And so a investigatory commission has been formed in Parliament that's supposed to come up with answers to these questions. And it's really one of the hottest topics in Latvian politics today.
Do you think how successful is the Latvian Anti-Corruption Bureau? How established is that? How influential is that?
Most important is that the person running the institution, but also at the next level, running the departments, that they are genuinely committed to these issues, to fighting corruption. In Latvia, that was the case for many years, starting around 2002, when the then government nominated a woman called Jutta Strīte to be the head of the Anti-Corruption Bureau. Parliament didn't accept that nomination from the government, but nevertheless she continued to work there as head of the investigatory department. A number of other very important investigations and indictments were thanks to the fact that there was a group of people in the Bureau who were very committed to fighting corruption, and despite all the political pressure, and there was a huge amount of political pressure against them all the time, they were able to continue these investigations. Unfortunately, we're in a situation right now where it's not entirely clear whether the Bureau will really be able to fulfill that role of investigating high-level corruption. They still continue to arrest policemen and things like that for taking small bribes, but whether they will continue working on high-level corruption is an open question. But the fact is that for almost 15 years, this was an institution that really did a great deal of good, that was that the bad guys were actually scared of. And even if there's a break now, even if we're in a situation where perhaps it's not as effective anymore, I think that experience in and of itself shows that it is possible, and that I hope that soon we'll be able to return to a situation where we once again will have people running the Bureau who are actively interested in fighting corruption.
When we are speaking about corruption in Latvia, high-level corruption, all kind of the deals, of course the question of the Russian influence pops up. Latvia is the route for the Russian goods on external markets. So really in that particular case, are there any things there, or this is an eternal Latvian case?
Well, I mean, anytime you have people talking about doing business in ports, you have to talk about Russian transit. And there is one episode in these discussions that we published where Schlesser specifically talks about having a very rich Russian investor who is very closely tied to the Kremlin come in and build a fertilizer transshipment terminal in the port of Riga. So they do have these business interests. The other issue that is clearly tied to Russia is that Schlesser talks about being very interested in getting investments in various real estate development deals, and to get the money for that, he came up with a scheme to allow people who invest a certain money by buying an apartment or something in Latvia, that they would get residency for 5 years in the country, which was a very controversial proposal, but he got that through Parliament, and it was clearly because he had these business interests that he wanted to that would be beneficial for. We don't see them talking about that kind of money exchanging hands between Russia and them. I'm not saying that didn't happen, but we don't see that. We don't see that in the conversations about direct sort of corruption coming from Russia influencing them. But the fact is that maybe that's not even necessary, because their business interests are tied to Russia, and so they're always very aware of what the Russians are thinking and how, and they don't want to do anything politically that could harm their businesses. So, just the fact that they're doing business with the Russians, and that's an important sort of income for them, is a tool of influence. And I think that the publication of these conversations, hopefully, and we see that happening because there was an immense amount of interest. I mean, these issues were just sold out. I mean, you never see every copy of a print run of a magazine be sold out, and the last one that we ran, we only, out of all the thousands and thousands that we printed, we only got 200 back that weren't sold. So there was an immense amount of interest in this, and I think, and I hope, that the people who up until now have been kind of able to close their eyes, this will force them to say, well, this is printed black on white. I read it, I read what they said, and they spoke in a very vulgar way. I mean, I'm not going to say all the words that they used, but you can probably imagine they use a lot of Russian swear words. And when you read that and you say, can I really accept this? And I think that for I hope that for a significant number of the people who are willing to sort of close their eyes, they won't be able to do that anymore because we published this.
So basically, Russia is fighting. So basically, we can say that with that, Latvia is somehow healing itself from the oligarchs.
Yep, that's what we're trying to do.